Welcome to Session 4 of Mainstream Apologetics. We're glad you decided to join us for this session. During the session, we'll conclude our discussion, The Existence of God. As you'll recall from last session, we discussed premise 1 of the KAMAL cosmological argument. The universe had a singularity beginning. During this session, we'll discuss premise 2, something that begins to exist has a cause, and premise 3, something cannot come from nothing. In addition, we'll respond to various objections to the KAMAL cosmological argument by discussing the following topics. Number 1, the trustworthiness of mathematics. Number 2, the implausibility of an infinity past. And finally, number 3, the reality of the supernatural. We begin this session with premise 2 of the KAMAL cosmological argument. Something that begins to exist has a cause. As with premise 1, the universe had a beginning, we use both empirical observation and rational thought to demonstrate the validity and truthfulness of this premise. At the heart of this premise is the law of causality, which states that every effect has a cause. We need to understand that the law of causality is rooted in the fundamental laws of physics. In physical terms, the laws of causality represent the transfer of energy and momentum from one object to another. We readily observe this law at work in the physical world day in and day out. We illustrate this idea of cause and effect with the graphic of dominoes. In simple terms, the law of causality can be thought of as a chain reaction, where an effect is tightly linked to a physical cause. We say that the effect is inextricably linked to the cause because the effect is the necessary outcome. Further, this chain is regarded as unbroken since the creation of the universe, which is represented by the center of the domino chain. Once started, this chain reaction goes on forever, or at least until creation ceases to exist. If there is an effect, there must have been a precipitating cause. This means that no effect is uncaused or self-caused. In fact, there is no material evidence to support an uncaused or self-caused effect. Because the law of causality is so predictable, it is regarded as axiomatic because it is a self-evident truth and is irrefutable. Applying the law of causality to the origin of the universe, we argue that the Big Bang must have had a precipitating cause, or it could not have occurred, and this precipitating cause must have pre-existed and come from outside creation. The most reasonable conclusion is that the universe came about by the transcendent power of a creator God. For those that don't believe in a creator God, there are only two other explanations for the existence of the universe. The first explanation is a self-existent universe, where the universe did not have a beginning, or the universe always existed. The second explanation is the self-created universe. We will discuss this alternative later in the session. The notion of a self-existent or eternal universe, popular in the 1800s, has been proven by the scientific community in the last century to be false. Based on scientific evidence we explored in the previous session, we know that time had a beginning. Because of the law of causality and the plethora of scientific evidence, we easily refute the notion of a self-existent universe. And finally, we come to premise 3 of the KAMAL cosmological argument. Something cannot come from nothing. To explore this premise, we employ a branch of philosophy known as metaphysics, which was pioneered by Greek philosophers Plato, Aristotle, and many others. Metaphysics is concerned with the nature of being, or the existence of things in the physical world. This premise has to do with how the universe came to exist. Metaphysics is comprised of laws that are referred to as first principles. These first principles are cornerstone or foundational principles upon which all systems of thought are built. They are both elementary and irreducible. Let's explore the first principle of the law of non-contradiction as it relates to creation. According to Aristotle, the law of non-contradiction states, nothing can both exist and not exist at the same time and in the same respect. A more general restatement of the law of non-contradiction is, an object cannot be in two contradictory or opposing states at the same time within the same context. For example, I cannot be dead and alive at the same time. I'm either dead or alive. Further, I cannot be partially dead and partially alive at the same time. I'm either one or the other. We refer to this as mutual exclusivity. So what is the law of non-contradiction, and why is it important to our discussion of creation? For the universe to come from nothing, the universe would have to exist before it existed in order to create itself. Let me repeat. For the universe to come from nothing, the universe would have to exist before it existed in order to create itself. Essentially, the universe could not exist and exist at the very moment of creation. This violates the law of non-contradiction. We can also argue that certain state transitions are not possible in the physical world. In the case of life and death, I cannot transition from a state of death to life. The same holds true for matter. Nothing cannot transition into something. This is because nothing is non-existent and therefore is devoid of any formative power to create itself. As with the law of causality, there is no material evidence for any exception of the law of non-contradiction in the physical world. So now let's apply this first principle of thought to one of the central topics in our training series, the nature of truth. The question is truth objective? When we apply the law of non-contradiction to whether or not we can know anything objectively, we wind up with a system of either-or logic. Either-or logic acknowledges the existence of contrary opposing states, but mandates that an object can only be in one state at any given time. Or something can either be true or false at a given time. This system of thought allows for both absolute and relative truths. Absolute truth is defined as an external, universal truth, whereas relative truth is defined as subjective, individual truth. This law of non-contradiction has been challenged throughout the ages. One of the most influential objectors was German philosopher G.W.F. Hegel in the mid-19th century. He regarded the notion of truth based on either-or logic as fallacious. Hegel created a system of thinking based on both-and logic, known as dialectic logic. This system of thinking states that multiple conflicting truths can coexist in space and time. Therefore, an object or truth can be in contradictory and opposing states at the same time. For Hegel and other proponents of both-and logic, there is no such thing as absolute universal truth. Hegel's system of logic is based on human perspective, where truth is in the mind of the beholder. Postmodernist John Caputo also claims that there's no such thing as absolute truth, where he writes, "The truth is that there is no objective truth about reality." While Caputo's use of the word truth makes for an amusing rhetoric device, his statement is utterly self-refuting. How can Caputo claim for certain that there's no absolute truth when postmodernists do not believe in a certain truth. The bottom line is that proponents of both and logic acknowledge that truth is both non-exclusive and elusive. Most today would conclude that if it were not for the existence of absolute truth or either-or logic, we would not be able to reason about anything. Quite honestly, if all things were true, anarchy would ensue, and we would not survive as a human race. If someone doesn't believe in a creator God, the only remaining objection is that the universe is self-created. In other words, the universe created itself from nothing. Does anyone actually believe that the universe created itself? Absolutely. There are many. Stephen Hawking, Albert Einstein, and others. When we read or listen to the news, we often hear news flashes like the following. World-renowned scientist Stephen Hawking declares in his book, The Grand Design, that the universe created itself from nothing. As we just discussed, the whole notion of self-creation is logically absurd. So why then are prominent scientists so adamant about the universe being self-created or self-existent? The answer is simple. They have no other choice. If they don't believe in a creator God, they must formulate some other theory that seems plausible. Essentially, their credibility as scientists is at stake. So beware. Secular scientists are working overtime to discredit the biblical account of creation. While their theories at first glance might seem plausible, they are actually more fantastic and unbelievable than the biblical account. Before we close out this session, we want to present 3 additional topics that have a bearing on our discussion of creation. These topics will lay a more solid foundation for all future discussions. These topics include the trustworthiness of mathematics, the implausibility of infinity past, and the reality of supernatural events such as miracles, signs, and wonders. We begin with the first foundational topic, mathematics. Postmodernists would have us believe that the language of mathematics is ambiguous and imprecise, like spoken languages. The untrustworthiness of information is the premise upon which postmodernism is anchored. While this may be true of the semantic interpretation of human languages, their claims as they relate to mathematics are baseless. Over the years, scientists have consistently acknowledged the reliability of numbers and the precision of mathematical equations. According to Eugene Wigner, Nobel Prize laureate, mathematics is a wonderful gift. And he writes, "The miracle of the appropriateness of the language of mathematics for the formulation of the laws of physics is a wonderful gift, which we neither understand nor deserve. We should be grateful for it." When Wigner uses the term the language of mathematics, he is referring to 2 properties that make mathematics special. The first property is quantifiability. Quantifiability allows scientists to quantify physical factors such as the gravitational constant, the mass of the Earth, and so on. The second property is relationality. Relationality allows scientists to specify the precise relationship between these physical factors using mathematical equations. Taken together, these 2 properties are used unambiguously and precisely to describe the physical world. One thing philosophers and scientists agree on is that mathematics is inherent in creation. Mankind did not invent mathematics, but rather we discovered it. As Wigner implies, it is a property endowed by the Creator. Therefore, we must conclude that the language of mathematics is trustworthy for precisely describing the world in which we live. The second of these foundational topics is infinity past. We need to ask, why is the topic of infinity past so crucial to our discussion of apologetics? The answer is simple. If an infinity past exists, then anything is possible. For example, if time past is infinite, then our universe didn't have a beginning. It always existed. Or if time past is infinite, then there just might be an infinite number of universes where at least one universe is fine-tuned to support life, like planet Earth. Or finally, if there is an infinite amount of time for evolution to occur, then there's an adequate amount of time for complex organisms to form by natural processes. Do you see where this all leads? This notion of infinity past opens up a number of possibilities for secular scientists to discredit the biblical account of creation. William Lane Craig, in his book Reasonable Faith, argues a potential infinity can exist, but an actual infinity cannot exist. For if an actual infinity could exist, this would spawn all sorts of absurdities. Scientists would readily agree that a potential infinity is useful for all sorts of mathematical calculations involving time and many other applications. However, as Craig points out, an actual infinity leads to all sorts of absurdities. Here are a couple of absurdities to illustrate Craig's point. The first is something I call lost in time, where time itself is absurd. If there's an infinite past and an infinite future, then the current moment in time is not definite. Therefore, time itself cannot be real and must be an illusion. The second example of absurdity is Hilbert's Hotel, created by David Hilbert, a German mathematician. Imagine a hotel that is full, yet can accommodate an infinite number of new guests. Hilbert's Hotel cannot be infinitely full and infinitely empty at the same time. We know that this is a contradiction. The marquee on the hotel would have to read, "No vacancies, guests welcome." We would all agree that this is absolutely absurd. We want to make sure we don't confuse infinity past with the eternality of God. Remember, time is created. God's eternal nature is not measured in time. God is timeless. God is not subject to time. He is transcendent and independent of created time. We use the term eternal when referring to God's existence. In Exodus 3:14, God refers to himself as I am who I am. This is the first person singular present tense of the verb to be. Essentially, God is. Eternality is a statement of being. The third of our foundational topics is the supernatural. The topic of the supernatural has been hotly debated by philosophers for millennia. Perhaps the most significant objection against the supernatural emerged during the Enlightenment period of the 1700s, where philosopher David Hume argued that if something cannot be observed empirically, it is not real. This gave birth to the school of thought called materialism. Materialism denies the supernatural because it requires us to believe that there are things that cannot be observed with our five senses and that violate the first principles of logic, specifically the law of causality and the law of non-contradiction. Ultimately, materialism denies any power above or outside of nature, and more specifically, the transcendent power of a creator God. The Christian response to materialism is straightforward. We argue that because this universe was not created by natural means, the creator was acting supernaturally. The basic argument is creation itself demonstrates the supernatural power of a transcendent creator God. Therefore, belief in the supernatural power of God is both plausible and rational. Today, many scientists acknowledge that the natural process doesn't adequately explain the existence of the universe. Because of the vast complexities of creation, many secular scientists conclude that time, space, and matter came into existence by a supernatural force or even a god. Here are a couple of testimonies from the scientific community. The first is from Arthur Eddington. The beginning seems to present insuperable difficulties unless we agree to look on it as, frankly, supernatural. The second quote is from Robert Jastrow, that there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. What is demonstrated by the cosmological record is that the universe did not come about by natural means. As we bring our discussion of the existence of God to a close, we want to affirm the big idea we began with in session 3. The universe in which we live was created by a transcendent God. We learned from these last two sessions that this is the most reasonable conclusion to draw from the evidence, thus demonstrating the existence of the God of the Bible. As we've been saying throughout this training series, we can trust the processes of empirical observation and rational thought, aided by the rigor of mathematics and scientific method, as well as the laws of logic. Once again, we want to give you an opportunity to reflect on the teaching of this session. If you're in a group, please discuss these questions. Otherwise, answer these questions individually. We want to call your attention to the bonus question, what do you believe to be true about God based on today's teaching? Why do you believe it to be true? We encourage you to build on the answer from last session.